Hey guys, welcome to the first video in my Wario Land marathon. Today we're going to be looking at Wario Land for the Game Boy. Now this is not a game I've actually played before, so it should be interesting to take a look at a series I have no experience with, see how it improves over time with each game. But before we can get into the sequels, we gotta start with the roots. So let's take a look at Wario Land and see how it holds up. Wario Land's story begins with a duck on a pirate ship or something. The game doesn't really explain what's going on in the opening cinematic and just drops you right into the game. So we're gonna have to go to the manual for some more details. Right, so Wario Land begins right after Super Mario Land 2, in which Mario had reclaimed his castle from Wario's clutches. Now Wario wants a castle of his own, so he follows a rumor that the pirates of Kitchen Island stole the giant golden statue of Peach. He embarks to retrieve it so that he can hold it for ransom and use that, plus the treasures he finds on his journey, to buy a cooler castle than Mario's. I can't say our protagonist is really that relatable or even likable here, but since none of this is actually explained in the game, I can't fault it too much. After all, this did come from a time where story was almost always an afterthought, especially in platformers. The premise itself is fine and works well for a character like Wario, but I personally feel it could have been done a little bit better, especially if it had been actually explained in the game. Other than that, it's just okay. Not bad, but not great, and that's a common theme with this game. For example, the music. I wouldn't call it bad per se, but none of the songs are really memorable or catchy at all, with only 2 or 3 exceptions out of the entire soundtrack. You'll notice that almost every song in the game uses exclusively low-pitched notes that sound almost like a bunch of farts at times. Many of the songs try to be slow and atmospheric, but just end up sounding awkward. Depending on your taste, you'll probably either find the music just okay like I did, or hate it. Either way, I can't really imagine anyone falling in love with this soundtrack. The visuals, however, do fare a bit better. The enemies all look distinct and memorable, and the settings and backgrounds are all pretty good looking too. There's only one enemy design I take issue with, and that's this armored penguin looking guy. His armor features a single spike sticking out of his front side, which on contact will damage Wario. But there's also a spike sitting on top of his helmet, but you're totally safe to jump on his head without taking damage. This caused some confusion with me every time I encountered one of these guys until I accidentally landed on his head and realized you can do that without getting hit. That small issue aside, the enemies are all pretty well designed. The problems with the graphics mainly lie in the level themes. While in name, each of the different sections of the game are based off of different foods like Rice Beach, Lake Asparagus, and Parsley Woods, which later becomes Parcelli Woods in a pretty amazing typo. Visually, the levels are more like Fire World, Ice World, Castle World, etc. The levels don't really represent the foods they're named after, and as a result, a lot of them just kind of blend together. There are really only a few levels I can remember off the top of my head, like the 2 auto-scrolling train levels and the levels where you're being chased through a tunnel by a thwomp lookalike. The rest of the levels are visually pretty uninteresting. That being said, the sprites do all look pretty good, and the game uses some really neat looking effects for certain bosses, which you won't be able to see in this video because I recorded the gameplay in 30 FPS. While this is all fine and good, where the game is really most divisive is the gameplay aspect. Wario controls decently enough in this game. I found him to be a bit sluggish, so I ended up spamming the charge move despite it barely making any difference until near the end of the game where I accidentally discovered that holding up and right while jumping causes Wario to move at nearly twice his normal speed. I'm not sure if this was intended or not, but had I known about it earlier in my playthrough of this game, I would have generally enjoyed it a little bit more. There's actually quite a lot of nuance to controlling Wario in this game, and if you master it, you can make pretty quick work of everything in your path, but figuring out every little detail to Wario's moveset is quite the challenge. Wario can jump on enemies to turn them upside down, which makes them able to be picked up and thrown at other enemies, killing every enemy it lands on. While it is satisfying to kill a bunch of enemies at once like this, the arc at which Wario throws the enemies seemed inconsistent at times. I'm still not sure what causes it or if I was just imagining it, but I swear sometimes he would throw enemies farther than other times, so I didn't really use this that much. Wario also has a dash ability in his normal form, which will instantly kill enemies and turn them into a coin. This move also allows Wario to break through blocks in his path. This ended up being a lot more useful for me because it was quick and easy to pull off. Finally, for Wario's default moveset, you can create a big coin by pressing up and B together. This coin is used to unlock checkpoints and the ending door to most of the levels, but can also be used as a projectile to kill enemies just like you can for other enemies. While I think this is a cool idea in concept, in execution it's completely pointless and unnecessary. You can already throw enemies to kill other enemies anyway, so there's no need to waste your coins on making a projectile to kill enemies with.
As for using it to pay for checkpoints and ending doors, why? I honestly can't see any reason to have this feature in the game. The only thing it really adds is an extra button press at best, or a bit of backtracking if you don't have enough coins at worst. But that will rarely ever happen. The other big reason this mechanic is pointless is that it's actually counterintuitive if you want to get the best ending, since the ending you get depends on your coin count at the end of the game. But I'll get more into the endings later. While I'm on the subject of checkpoints, I also have no idea why they felt it was necessary to put every single checkpoint in the game in its own little room. Every checkpoint forces you to go into a door, sometimes climb up some ladders or something, and then activate the checkpoint, only to have to go back to the room to go back into the actual level. This is bad for two reasons. One, it's a total waste of time. A small waste of time, sure, but having to do this for every checkpoint really makes it annoying. Two, you don't know what's behind a door until you go in it, so you may skip a door thinking that it's the intended way through the level, and continuing past it will reward you with some secrets. On top of that, sometimes the checkpoint doors are hidden, so when you think you found a secret, you get let down by it just being a checkpoint. Anyway, getting back to Wario's moveset, this game also features a few power-ups. The garlic power-up is Wario's super mushroom counterpart. It will transform you into Big Wario if you're Small Wario, but if you're already Big Wario, it will transform you into Bull Wario. Despite this, Bull Wario has its own power-up as well, which is completely pointless as it functions the same as the garlic unless you're Small Wario, in which case it will transform you straight up to Bull Wario. Bull Wario has the ability to dash for a longer amount of time, as well as letting you hover during your dash if you dash off of an edge. You can also do a ground pound that will break blocks below you and stun all enemies on the screen when you activate it. Unlike Mario's ground pound, you don't stop in midair to use it. It also lets you break blocks in one hit instead of two, and lets Wario stick to the ceiling if you hold up and A together. The ceiling stick mechanic is again a good idea in concept, but in execution it just kind of falls flat. It's used for one puzzle in the entire game, in which you use it on the bottom side of a conveyor belt to get over a long gap. While I thought this was a brilliant idea, it just wasn't fleshed out enough. This can be said for pretty much every puzzle in the game as well. Moving on, there's also a jet power-up that allows Wario to fly through the air for a short amount of time, as well as dash underwater. This also increases Wario's running speed, but only by a very small amount. Finally, there's the dragon power-up, which replaces Wario's dash ability with a flamethrower that comes out of Wario's hat. This flamethrower can make quick work of any enemy or block in your way, so it's pretty ideal for bosses. It also decreases your running speed by a small bit, but it's barely noticeable. There's also an invincibility star that acts exactly how you expect it to. So as you can see, there's a lot to get used to for controlling Wario in this game, and because of that, combat can feel very clunky at times, especially when you're in an enclosed area with little room to move around and enemies are bouncing all over the place and you can't even tell whether they're stunned or knocked down or dead or what. Most of the time when I found myself in a situation like this, I came out on top, but there were a few times where I wasn't so lucky. The bosses in this game are all pretty simple, so while they aren't too frustrating, they aren't really that engaging or memorable either. Alright, let's get into what really matters most here, the level design. I've already talked about the counterintuitive checkpoint system and lackluster puzzles, but in regards to level design, this game tries to do quite a lot. Very few levels feature any prominent gimmicks, the only ones that come to mind are the examples I gave earlier being the auto-scrollers and the thwomp levels. But within each level, there's a fair amount to do. To Wario Land's credit, the game makes backtracking pretty streamlined and hassle-free for a 2D platformer. All enemies you kill in a level are gone for good unless you die or exit the level, so if you need to go back for a specific power-up for a secret, or if you just want to make sure you didn't miss anything, you won't have enemies you've already dealt with getting in your way. Additionally, if you spawn a power-up from a block and choose not to collect it, it won't despawn at all, so you can feel free to make a note of what power-ups each level has without worrying about having to respawn them by dying or restarting the level. However, if you want to exit a level, you're forced to either die, finish the level, or backtrack all the way back to the very beginning of the level and go through the entry door. This just seems like a totally pointless way to waste the player's time. Going back to the power-up puzzles, the power-ups are all cool and useful in their own ways, but because of how broken it was, I found myself almost exclusively using the jet power-up. The only times I wasn't using it were when I couldn't find one or I was forced to use a different power-up for a secret or boss fight. This would be fine if the secrets that actually required you to use a specific power-up weren't so scarce. I ended up sticking with the jet power-up for a good 80% of the game because there just weren't enough instances where I was incentivized to use anything else outside of my initial times trying each of them out. I've talked a lot about secrets and puzzles so far, but I haven't really explained what they're for, so let me do that. Throughout the 30-something levels in this game, there are 15 hidden treasures, and I actually found hunting them down to be pretty satisfying and fun. The biggest problem with them is that I had no way to know which levels had treasures in them and which ones didn't. For a good third of the treasures, I had to look up a guide just so I could know which levels to look in, and for one treasure, I had to look up a guide for the actual treasure itself because it's hidden behind an invisible door, and that's just plain bullshit. On top of those issues, once you actually find a secret and enter the treasure room, you better hope you're not Small Wario because you need to attack the chest to get the treasure inside, and Small Wario doesn't have any attacking moves. This means you have no choice but to search all throughout the rest of the levels for a power-up, hoping you don't get hit, and if there isn't one, you you have to do the whole level all over again. And on top of all that, if you get a game over, you lose one of your treasures and have to go back and get it. So you better remember which level you got it from. Despite all the issues I talked about here, these really only account for a very small portion of the game. The majority of the game is just typical 2D platformer fare. It's not bad, but there's really nothing memorable about a big chunk of the game. Then there are the endings. At the end of the game, Wario encounters the Princess of Kitchen Island. Alerted to Wario's presence, she summons a genie from a lamp, and this acts as the final boss. Once you defeat it, Mario arrives out of nowhere in an airplane to scoop up the giant statue of Peach, and then leaves. Fortunately for Wario, he's left with a magical lamp that gives him a genie. The genie agrees to give Wario a new castle depending on how much money Wario gives him. Wario Land features 6 different endings, and the only thing that separates them is your coin count at the end of the game. The treasures you find throughout your journey do add to the coin count, but it is possible to get every treasure and still only get the second best ending. This is what happened in my playthrough. I'm not upset that I didn't get the best ending, but it is kind of annoying that I went out of my way to get every hidden treasure in the game and still didn't get the best ending because I just didn't have enough regular coins at the end of the game. The different endings only give you a different castle during the credits, and some of the bad endings are pretty funny, but I was not about to go play the entire game just for a few different endings. It just wasn't worth my time. Overall, with a few small flaws that need ironing out, nothing really exceptionally good going on here, Wario Land is just okay. I wouldn't call it a bad game by any means. It controls well, it looks nice, it's decently long for a Game Boy platformer, having over double the amount of levels as Mario Land 2, but there's just no substance to any of it. There's really no reason to go out and play this game in 2017.
Despite how lackluster a lot of the game is, I do see a lot of potential in this formula. The treasure hunting is fun, the puzzles are fun, the labyrinth-like levels are fun. I feel like if they focused more on those elements and fleshed them out, they can make a much better game rather than just another Mario. So hopefully the later games in the series will make those improvements and capitalize on that potential.
While it's not really a bad game by any means, I would recommend just skipping this one unless you really want to see how the series started.
Next time we'll be talking about Virtual Boy Wario Land. I know I said in the announcement video for this marathon that I would be tackling the first 4 Wario Land games and then Virtual Boy Wario Land, but technically Virtual Boy Wario Land is the second Wario Land game that was made, so I'd rather just go in order. Sorry this video took so long to get out. I've been swamped with work and going to too many games and all that. I hope you guys can understand. I'll definitely try to get the next video out a lot quicker. Anyways, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.